Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Practical Founders Podcast, where every week we hear an amazing story from a serious founder who built a valuable software company and did it without big funding. I'm your host, Greg Head, and this week my guest is Dr. Matthew Jones. He is a trained clinical psychologist who works only with startup co founders. So he's not an executive coach or a psychologist for everybody. He's a specialist that just works with crazy entrepreneurs who work together with a co founder to build their companies and change the world in their own ways. The unique situations that they have. He's worked with over 100 companies and hundreds of co founders. Sometimes in a crisis, this isn't working out. We got to figure it out mode. And sometimes to solve those festering conflict issues that come up. As we know, those senior team and co-founder relationships are vital to the success of a scaling software company. So we talk about all the issues and the tools and the frameworks and how you can be thinking about this if you have a co-founder and all the crazy situations that come up. We go through lots of examples, and it's a very interesting conversation for anybody considering a co-founder or as a co-founder in their business right now. Hey, Matt, welcome to the Practical Founders Podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to dive in.
Yeah, it's not a normal founder interview today about their journey and all of that. Co-founder issues come up. This is talking about all the co-founder issues that you help startup founders deal with as a clinical psychologist and startup co-founder therapist, I guess you'd call it, and you're an author as well. And so we'll talk about that today. Where are you these days?
I'm based in Denver, Colorado, although I tend to work with teams remotely all throughout the world.
I bet. Do you work with anybody face to face in Denver or otherwise?
Usually the face-to-face are reserved for like an on-site intensive where I'll come in for a period of time, like a day or two, and do some real deep work with the team. And so that happens, but not on a consistent basis.
Okay. Well, I'm really excited to talk to you. You've got a deep knowledge. You've worked with hundreds of co-founders and over 100 companies as you've been focusing on this. So tell us about what you do and what your focus is.
Of course. Well, as you mentioned, my background is a licensed psychologist, and so that's certainly influences the way that I work. But for the last 6 years, I've been focusing on working exclusively with startup co-founding teams to help them improve their communication, teamwork, and decision making. And so the way that I approach this work is really thinking about how do we maximize the alignment of the co-founding team, because I think that's the most important relationship in business.
Yeah. And you kind of make it sound like you're a nice guy that helps co-founders, but really, the co-founder relationship is critical to the success of a startup. And you're helping out when there's critical issues that threaten the relationship and the startup itself, presumably.
100%. And I do see teams kind of across that spectrum, some who recognize the value and importance of maintaining alignment, and they know something major is happening. Maybe they're scaling up pretty rapidly, or
Yeah.
they're noticing some churn or other issues within the employees. And so they'll be more preventative working with me. And I certainly also work with teams who are actively in pain or noticing some friction that they want to address.
Yeah. How many, I guess, clients, how many startup companies and their co-founders do you work with at a time?
It really depends on the intensity of the engagement, because sometimes I'm meeting with teams multiple times a week if we're in like a stabilize or split type of crisis intervention,
Yeah.
or once a month, and so it can really vary. But I would say between like eight and 15, maybe 12, somewhere in there.
Okay. Well, I was just checking it out. I've had a perception. I mean, in looking inside our peer groups, we have a little more than half are solo founders, and that's probably why they're attracted to the group. They want to be around other founders. But VC funded stats show for VC funded companies, the stats show that, say, two-thirds of them, a majority, have multiple co-founders, and that's sometimes talked about as a recommendation. VCs only fund if you have a co-founder. There's a team involved and so forth. Fewer times a solo founder. But bootstraps are higher. Probably more than half of bootstrapped SaaS founders that I talk to are solo founders. So you're working with the co-founding teams when they have issues that are affecting their business or their lives.
That's correct. So there's some coaches who like to approach working in a lot of one-on-one type of engagements where they'll meet with the CEO and let's say like a CTO and do that in silos and then every now and then meet as a team. Or you have the more traditional like executive team type of coach who will come in and work with the entire executive team. I'm actually
Hmm.
between these two where my main focus is on that primary unit of the co-founding team since it sets the
Hmm.
floor and ceiling of the team's culture and execution. And
Yeah.
so that's exactly where I focus. And so my main intervention is working and sitting with both co-founders or more if you have more co-founders all at the same time having group conversation.
So you're not an executive coach or, somebody that the VC installs to just keep the productivity up or keep the CEO from blowing up. You're specialized for this particular co-founder thing. It isn't business partners for any kind of business. It's co-founders in, say, the crazier tech startup world, mostly software, presumably.
I think that's right. I mean, I certainly work in a wide range of different industries, so everything from climate tech,
Ah,
through mom and pop businesses, ad agencies, marketing firms, attorney. I've worked with attorneys before, so I do work with
ah.
both bootstrapped, but primarily it does seem to tilt towards a little bit more of those venture backed startups.
Well, I've been through that game, and the faster you grow, the higher the stress, and the sooner and more critical those issues pop up between the leadership team. It's just a crucible for the relationship of the founders, their mental health, their stamina. It's an extreme sport there. Is that what you find that the faster companies grow, the faster these kind of issues pop up?
I think generally that's correct. And one piece I'd add is you mentioned the mental health component, and part of what I found both through like my coaching experience with teams, and then also as I examined adjacent areas of literature. So looking at founder mental health research, there's a lot by Michael Freeman out there. As I looked at marital dynamics and research there, and then made a series of hypotheses. Part of what I found about this relationship is that if you get it right, if there's a strong positive relationship going on within the startup co-founding teams, my theory is that it's actually going to buffer you and provide some insulation from
Oh,
those
yeah.
entrepreneurial ups and downs. And the flip side is also true, where if it's not going well, it's actually going to exacerbate and make worse some of those managing your own psychology. And so that's why I think it's the most important point of intervention.
Well, I've definitely seen that and experienced it, and it is part of the adventure and the thrill and the challenge to go through it and do big things with teams, really hard things, climb Everest, you
Mhm.
know, that kind of game. And bootstrapped or VC funded, everybody's doing really hard things and doing it together. Are you as a specialist for co-founders? Are you a little bit like a marriage psychologist therapist for co-founders, and are there similarities there that we could talk about?
Sure. I mean, I think the biggest similarities are that at the root, a relationship with your co-founder as you go through these ups and downs and challenges of building and scaling a company is at the root of an attachment-based relationship, meaning that you
Mm,
rely on one another through some of those ups and downs, and what might look like just a business statement might also be a desire for connection, a desire to see that you're reliable, that the person's showing up for you personally and professionally during this time. And so that's where
mhm.
some of those different theories, techniques, and tools that work really well in marriage counseling, for example, like some of the Gottman work, Imago, emotion focused couples therapy, some of those tools and
Yeah.
frameworks do work in this partnership. And so that's a big part of the book that I wrote and the work that I do is figuring out which of those apply and kind of plugging those in because I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel here. There are best
Yeah.
practices for interpersonal dynamics and for communication, and so that's a lot of what I bring to the work.
Great. Well, we'll go through some scenarios here and talk about your tools and techniques and approaches. I've been through your book. There's a lot of great content in there for diagnosing the issue, seeing the issue under the issue,
Mm.
and tools for getting through it. Very useful for somebody who says, I think I've got an issue. And the name of the book is The Co Founder Effect. What is the rest of the title there, just so people know it?
Yeah, so it's the co-founder effect, how to diagnose, fix, and scale healthy communication for startup success.
Okay. Is it all about communication there?
Well,
Meaning, the challenges and differences can be resolved if there's the right way to work on it together?
100%. I mean, and that's the thing that I see that's so
Mm.
challenging is teams will come to me after they've had the same conversation 20 times, right? Or after they
Yeah.
have multiple late hour
Yeah.
conversations that are eroding productivity, where they find themselves laying in bed thinking about replaying an argument with their co-founder instead of their product. So that's an existential liability and risk to the business that I want to fix. And so part of the book, it does have,
Mhm.
actually 4 parts. The first one is all about, kind of it was a piece that I had to write, which is establishing, what co-founder conflict is, because believe it or not, it hasn't been diagnosed before or defined
Sure.
explicitly. And so I kind
Right.
of had to do that from a psychological lens just to say, "Hey, look, this is a valid, area of inquiry that researchers, I think, need to spend a lot more time on." And so that's kind of part
Yep.
1. Part 2, to your point, is getting into those deeper underlying psychological dynamics that are at the root of most disagreements. And then part 3 is all about the tactics of how you solve that. And that's whenever it gets into the more practical how to, here's exactly how to say the thing. Here's the method, the co-founder conflict navigation system to walk you
Mhm.
through exactly what you need to do to get that alignment. And then part 4 is just really how do we scale that? Because part of the next problem, if you will, with some of these engagements is if we don't figure out how to create sustainable systems to maintain alignment as a co-founding team that can promote regression, and we want to get on the preventative side of being proactive in these dialogues. And then if we're able to do that, then we really want to make sure that we're developing shared language and frameworks with the rest of the executive team so that we can really scale a high potency culture that understands how to navigate conflicts effectively.
Well, anybody who's, been through this, we have some of our listeners out there with co-founders, and sometimes it's working well, and sometimes they're in conflict, and sometimes it's a crisis. Sometimes it's, averted or very healthy. I've seen all of the above, there. Let's talk about what's some of the, I don't know, red flags or warning signs or, the first indications of not just, I guess there's healthy conflict, right? A disagreement. Two people can disagree. There's so much going on in a startup between values, culture, strategy, product, exit, styles, roles, responsibilities, funding, not funding, all that kind of thing. There's so much going on there. Let's talk about, when people come to you and you're hearing about unproductive co-founder relationships. What are some things, that they're saying off the bat and what's really going on?
I think it's really something that you might have just pointed out, which is recurring conflicts, and
Okay.
feeling like you're stuck in a cycle that's unproductive, where that's impacting you personally, it's impacting you professionally. That's whenever you might need a mediator or a third party to step in and help provide some new perspectives or tools or frameworks to help you get out of that loop.
So what you're saying is a lot of things you can resolve and things do get resolved. They get communicated and decided for better or worse, right? They're decided and you move on. But the things that keep coming back, this isn't getting solved. This isn't getting solved. This isn't getting solved, right? On our own.
That's right, and the piece I would add too, like I completely agree with your thought that there is such thing as healthy conflict, and that's part of what I really emphasize in the book. That conflict, in fact, is healthy. It's about how
Yeah.
you manage it that makes it effective or not effective. And a co-founder partnership without any conflict, it does not make it healthy. In fact, that can actually be the silent killer that erodes trust.
Right.
Because if you're not raising conflict, what you're often doing is internalizing it. And whenever you internalize conflict, it builds resentment. And resentment is what I call emotional debt that actually builds over time. And especially if you're in a high growth period, it's really hard to pay down that emotional debt.
Well, that sounds a lot like marriages, right? That, some things fester and they turn into deeper issues, and other things you kind of get through out there. Do people show up and say, like, I'm the CEO and he or she is the CTO, co founder, we've divided our roles, and now things are changing, and it's about roles or it's about equity percentages, or I wanna move faster and this person wanna move slower. Do they always come with kind of an objective, something to talk about as opposed to talking about, lower level feelings or psychological, you know, underpinnings?
I would say most often that is the case, whether it's roles and responsibilities, equity and compensation, strategic alignment, communication style. Like there's these different buckets or categories of disagreements that co-founders may have whenever they come to see me. But part of what I discover in working with them is what's on the surface is rarely the actual end all be all of the issue. There's deeper things,
Uh,
whether it's about power or recognition or degrees of closeness that we actually have to get to in order to resolve the root issue and then realign on the business objective.
and so and you have some tools about that. You talk about it in your book here, the different language levels. Like you could talk about any issue here. Why don't you introduce us to that, and we'll go through some examples.
Course. Part of what I talk about is the three languages that all teams speak. And I do this very early in the book to kind of set the stage, if you will, that again, most of the issues are not about the topic of conversation, they're about the unspoken emotional dynamics. And so in order to get into those and resolve those root issues, we need a different set of language, a different set of protocols for how we engage. And so those three languages are operational, psychological, and archetypal. Operational language is the language of business. So this is the
Mhm.
default mode of most teams that I work with, which is relatively rapid back and forth communication styles. There's typically some interrupting, a lot of shorthands. We're talking KPIs, product roadmap, whatever the case may be, and it actually doesn't require too much of a emotional or cognitive load. It's something that you can do pretty quickly. Like this is the default. Uh,
But you're saying that's the easy stuff right out there, even though it's pretty difficult on its own there. I can relate to that. Yeah, the talk about, how everybody feels about that and working on that, it's a different conversation. I get it.
Right. And so then as we go into psychological language, that's the language of, internally, how am I feeling? You know, internally, how are you feeling? And then interpersonally, how are we feeling together as we're working? And so that is, the language of some of these interpersonal dynamics. And it requires a fundamentally different skill set. To your point, it's slower, it's more deliberate, requires more
Oh, yeah.
curiosity, a little bit more pauses, and leaning into trying to help you, my co-founder, feel heard and understood in a different way. Because if we can align there, that often will help us resolve then the topic of conversation much faster.
So you're saying these objective conflicts that, people could point to and talk about, and they want this and I want that or whatever. You actually have to go into this different communications mode to see really what's going on there, acknowledge each other. I guess that sounds a little like marriage therapy, and, feel heard and understood and, I don't know, be self-aware about your own, I don't know, emotional underpinnings there and, generous enough to hear somebody else's point of view.
That's
I
right.
guess, is that where trust is built? Not just doing the things that are on our task list, but that kind of emotional relationship level?
Yeah, I define trust as I kind of divide it in two pieces. So operational trust and personal trust.
Okay.
Operational trust is I trust you to do the tasks and responsibilities, to do those things that you need to do as your as a co-founder, as part of this business. And so that is required. And a lot of companies that I work with, they tend to index on one or the other of these as being mandatory. And so sometimes for some teams, it's like, hey, I need to be able to trust you personally. Some is, hey, listen, if we can't run the business together, then there's, nothing else matters. And so I have to be able to trust you to uphold your roles and responsibilities on that side of things. So I need operational trust first. Personal
Right.
trust is more on the side of if I was in a bad situation and I called you in the middle of the night, would I trust that you would answer? If I needed you to watch my dog for a few hours, it was emergency. Like, would you be able to do that for me? And so that's kind of
Yeah.
like that deeper trust that is built in psychological language. And so I think that when both of these operate well in parallel, both that operational language and the psychological language, and there's trust on both of those levels, that's whenever we really see the synergistic effect or the 1 + 1 = 5, where we're part of a team where everyone's rowing the same direction at the same cadence. And that's whenever you can really elevate your performance as an organization. And so that's why I think both are important.
Well, I'm thinking back to several of my podcast guests where I've had both team members on there, and they're long-term co-founders in these practical SaaS businesses that don't have outside funding. And I'm kind of recognizing there's 2 levels of the conversation, and they don't really let, the conversation just stick with the operational stuff. How fast did you grow? And then what happened here? And like the technical parts of it. You know, they expand the conversation to understanding what somebody else was going through and it was really tough and how they filled in and right there's I can hear that literally that emotional mode in their conversations, these long-term co-founders who work together and they get stuff done in the business and continue to show up for each other. Is that one of the signals that this is could work out? We'll get through this is if there's a generosity and a leaning in for the cause of the startup. You know, in marriages, it would be for the cause of the family or whatever. But there's kind of a leaning in together as opposed to, you know, the festering and looking away kind of support. I don't know. Is that the? Do you see that kind of support?
I can say this, when teams are aligned on the best interest of the company and they truly put that above their individual egos, and there's alignment on the degree of sacrifice of how much time, energy, and effort we're
Yes.
putting in, and our contributions are clear, then I think that sets a really great foundation that can persevere through some of these other difficulties. And if that's not the case, it makes some of the interpersonal dynamics far more difficult to navigate.
Okay, so they're not just all related. You could be off on operational and not be able to get through it. How often do I mean, we see co-founder issues out there in VC-funded companies that require co-founders to get started, you know, the cause of the company and the big funding and the big goals cause squeeze out kind of challenges really fast, and if you can't get on board, then you gotta move on. I mean, how often do these kind of festering conflicts turn into, a divorce of, co-founders?
Yeah, I think the way that I'm gonna answer this is I'm gonna loop into the third language, that we didn't get to, which is archetypal language. Archetypal
Okay.
language is the language of the unconscious, and so this is a fancy way of saying the vibe. And part of what we all know whenever we're in a relationship or on a team is whether or not we feel that sense of alignment and togetherness, or if we're walking on eggshells, or if we feel this dread or something, we have this visceral bodily reaction where we see the Slack message come in at 6 a.m. Like there yeah, there's things like that actually are telling us and informing us about the health and the status of the relationship. And
Uh,
so a big important piece of what we need to work on is being able to name that elephant in the room, being able to give voice to that unspoken feeling that we have in relationship to people. And so part of what I see oftentimes is that in this difference between VC-backed startups and bootstrap companies, is
mm,
in bootstrap companies, there's a willingness to tolerate and to sit in that discomfort for a longer period of time.
yes. We
And
signed up
so
for a bigger quest, right, yeah.
a bigger quest, or maybe there's less urgency because we don't have investors breathing down our neck, or whatever.
Yeah.
There's an ability to dial up or down some of the intensity and speed. And so what I see is people will sit in that for an incredibly long duration. And actually, it's not like it's better or worse, but it's equally as painful, just in a different way from what I see on the
Mhm.
VC side, where there is a little bit more pressure to, hey, like, get on board and we'll try to figure it out. But if we can't, then exiting is not off the table and it's not abnormal within the space.
Right. That's interesting. Long is your I mean, how long do co-founders work together before they start identifying issues they can't resolve? Is this a few years in when things are getting sticky and things are festering, or is it pretty quickly, or does it take a long time?
The answer is it depends. And there are so many teams where in the very early stages of founding, they'll know something is off, whether that is a
Oh,
communication piece or a work contribution piece. And so there's a lot of for it, like within the venture backed world, a lot of pre-seed teams, so very, very early, who within the first year are already noticing a lot of compatibility issues. And then there's this
yeah.
question of, do we work on this, or is it already too problematic and we need to part ways? And so that's like one decision point. I also see teams bootstrapped or VC funded, who have worked together for, let's say, like 5 years, and it's just progressively getting worse. And so whether that's about not scaling along with the company and this transition from IC
Yeah,
to management that's
yeah.
so difficult,
Mhm.
and not being able to master that, or personal dynamics and circumstances can change that impact that degree of sacrifice and alignment with the long-term goal, such as, oh, I just got really sick, a family member died, whatever the case may be. And so that's actually fundamentally shifting my ability to contribute and to focus on the business. And so
Yeah.
that's also where those equity and compensation types of conversations can really come up. And so part of what I think is important is being able to change the relationship, the business structure, and the compensation accordingly as we go through a company company building together. I think if we try to just rigidly maintain this original agreement that no longer serves us or the company, that's whenever additional frictions and negative secondary effects really start to emerge.
Well, if you do it well enough and your company grows, getting to a million, getting to 3 million, getting to 10 million, those are very different kinds of companies. And not all CEO co founders or executive leader co founders make it through those transitions. Classic CEO is the startup guy that doesn't want to run a big factory, or vice versa, and it's generally a business side co-founder and a technical side co-founder in software. There's probably something unique about that. I don't know, one's pushier, one's probably more introverted. The technical co-founder is probably more introverted. Not always the case, but I don't know. Can you say there's more patterns involved in software startups?
There's tons of patterns, and some of like those stereotypes I think can be true. Some of just a lot of different conflicting values, whether that's like someone who really wants to iterate. Like I mean, this actually came up in a call the other day with some
Yeah.
co-founders who have different building philosophies. One who wants to really iterate, get a lot of customer feedback, and one who's more on the side of actually like I think we need to get really clear about our vision and what we're after first, and then kind of bring it to people.
Yeah.
And so very simple things like that can create a lot of friction, especially when paired with some of the other areas that may or may not be aligned. And so I think a lot of teams benefit from making those different differences. And you brought up introversion or extroversion. I talk about this in the book about some people who are external processors. That's me,
Yeah.
where we
Yep.
talk to then arrive at our conclusion, whereas other people have to think it over, mull it over, take a little bit of time, and then come back and we'll get directly into the thesis. And so those differences can start off and be quite positive. If we can manage that tension effectively, that's part of that's the magic of co-founders, right? Is the
Yeah.
complementary skills and ways of
Right.
operating
Yeah.
that allows you to land somewhere even more effective than you could have individually. But those same differences that give you that magic sauce also can be sources of friction, like an arthritic knee that just aches every now and then and sometimes gets worse and worse, right? And so that's where the tensions really have to be managed. And so that's why I advocate for making those differences as conscious and explicit as possible.
Yes. Right. And I've seen this myself, and I've seen it with co-founding teams when there's complete alignment and clarity about the strategy and the vision and a lot of the values, here's how we're going to do it and here's what we're going to do when they're completely aligned. But then there's complementary responsibilities, skills, personalities, introvert, extrovert, fast mover, slow mover, go for it, risk manager. And when I hear co-founders or we talk about that, knowing that I'm going to approach it like this and you're going to approach it like this by default, and sometimes that makes sense, and I'll let you go with it there, and sometimes my approach makes sense. You got to let me go with it here, and there's a give and take. That explicit complementary skills is I can see that as definitely a superpower. And VCs talk about this. They want to, know there's multiple perspectives in there.
Yeah, and I think as you talk about the give and take, that's probably one of the more important
Uh,
pieces. So Gottman talks about this within the marital context as accepting influence, meaning
eh,
that you can allow your partner to take lead every now and then in whatever decision or whatever the case may be. And there is a reciprocal give and take because whenever there's more rigidity, that's whenever things start to become unhealthy. So if you're constantly deferring to your partner and again internalizing that resentment, building the emotional debt, that's more of the problem. Bi-directional, like whoever, like it actually doesn't matter. What's more effective is that give and take in certain circumstances so that you can really maximize the gifts and the unique potentials of each person.
This podcast is brought to you by my friends at Fraction. Are you stuck at your 7-figure ARR with tech challenges holding you back? Whether it's tech debt, slow feature delivery, or other scaling challenges, you're not alone. Every founder hits this wall. That's where Fraction comes in. Fraction gives you access to senior US-based engineers and CTOs without full-time costs or hiring risks. Fraction founder Praveen Ganta is a practical founder himself who has been on this podcast. He grew his bootstrapped SaaS business, Hidden Levers, with fractional talent and sold it for more than $100 million. Fraction's experts come in to fix problems and do real work, not just give advice. Fraction is flexible and founder-friendly. Get 10 to 30 hours per week from from vetted and experienced US based talent. And you could start with 1 week risk-free trial to test it out. Find your next fractional senior engineer or CTO at fraction.work. Now back to our podcast. Well, I interviewed Seth and Clint, co-founders, who wanted to be together on the podcast, and their long-term successful bootstrap company, Genius Monkey. They talked about all the ways they help each other out and how they've changed roles through the years. It's been a while since they've been building this company, over 10 years. But they also said whoever argued the hardest for something got to go with it. That was
Mm,
a way of resolving it, and that worked for them, right? Whoever cared the most,
mhm.
right? And so there's a little bit of there's a give and take system that they used like that. I thought that was pretty curious. And,
Yeah.
I could see that in a lot of relationships, if you care so much, then I don't have to win.
I think that's a method that I've seen before as well, and part of like a team that I work with, where there've been a lot of some of these disagreements over the years, is they did implement a system of 1 to 5. Like one, I really don't care about this. 5, like I'm
Ah,
willing to die on this hill. It means everything to
yeah,
me.
uh-huh.
And so they would do the same mechanism that you're talking about, and that again, it can work so long as you're not building emotional debt and that process is
Yeah,
clear. So whether it's
right.
that process or other decision making models, again, consensus or like we're going to go with the hierarchy here, or like there's multiple ways to make decisions, or we're going to get out the Eisenhower matrix, whatever the case may be, make
Yeah,
sure that we're aligned there. I think what's most important is agreeing on that method, and then also checking in with yourself and being honest to make sure that there's not residual damage that's taking place.
right. I totally get it. All that damage out there, the crucible of, starting and growing and scaling a company, you know, creates all can create a lot of scars. I say in my fast growing, startup to $100 million experiences twice, like, there's scars there. And I'm kind of old school. I did it in the 90s and the 2000s and the 20 teens. So we didn't talk about mental health. We barely talked about stress. We didn't talk about all these useful languages and tools to get through it. We just gritted our teeth and set forth and all of that. So, let's again talk about mental health there, which is a more visible thing these days. I don't know if it's more prevalent or less prevalent. Is that a primary starting point that people have to be reasonably mentally healthy to be able to have a healthy relationship?
I mean, I think that would be a helpful thing to add in there for sure. But part of what's so interesting about the research is that Michael Freeman found that entrepreneurs are more likely to suffer from various mental
Yes.
illnesses, right? Like depression,
Yeah.
anxiety, bipolar. And so there's a
You're
higher
already crazy. Yes. Uh huh.
yeah, we're already crazy because who else
Uh
would
huh.
like try to do an impossible task that we know is excruciatingly difficult, that you're statistically not
Yeah.
likely to succeed, right?
Right.
And so, and we know that the journey makes some of those spikes, those higher and lower spikes, more intense. And so, I think that's again why I think that if we can get some of the communication patterns right, it can be so helpful. We can't erase, the fact that we all have our wounds and our ways of coping with those wounds. What we
Yeah.
can do is learn how to communicate more effectively as we go through those ups and downs. And so that's why I don't think it's a prerequisite that you need to, manage your
Okay.
depression or anxiety. But with that said, it can certainly make the whole process a lot easier if you're also having that support. So teams that I work with, like I said, I'm the co-founder specialist, so I'm going to help the teams continue that alignment from 0 to 1 all the way through 1 to 10. There's also teams who, especially once they have the budget and or have health insurance and other factors, where they'll work with individual therapists simultaneously to kind of
Yeah.
manage some of that mental and emotional load as well.
Yeah. Okay, great. So you're specifically in this dynamic here. What are the typical kinds of things that people show up with? If you can think back to recent examples here. Hey, Matt, we've got an issue. We'd like to see about getting your help. What does that look like when they come to you and start working with you? Like, what level do they have to hit?
I mean, I'll give you like I'll give you a few different examples.
Great.
So One is a co-CEO team that I've been working with for a few years. They now have switched that as a little precursor to I forgot actually the titles, but they recently split the roles in a different way. And while they came in, the main issue was roles and responsibilities, right? Hey Matt, we're
Yeah.
having a lot of trouble here because it seems like I'm doing a lot of the internal facing work and kind of running the operations and managing some of the product and some of the internal comms, et cetera. And then the other part is a little bit more external facing. So doing a little bit with the investors, doing a lot with the specific community that they serve. And so it's starting to create some aches and pains. As we went into those aches and pains, what we discovered was that there were several different factors happening simultaneously. One was a debate around recognition, where that internal facing CEO is feeling like, hey, I don't feel valued and appreciated both by external people at large and by you, my co founder, for all that I'm doing. Because I'm basically running the company while you get to go out
Yeah,
and do
yeah.
these things. And so
Right,
that's
and you
building
get
some.
to be out there waving to everybody, get all the clapping, right?
Exactly. And then on the other side, the other person's saying, hey, look, I know that what I'm doing is not scalable in the same way as some of the work that you're doing, but that doesn't mean it's not vital to our company's success because we're serving this clientele, this client base that I'm plugged into, and that I'm a vivid member of this community who's bringing people into the business, who's managing some of these relationships, and I want that to feel seen too and appreciated.
Yeah. Right.
But part of what was another piece here, just to add another layer of complexity, was they from 0 to 1, they were really close friends. And so they
Yeah.
worked as co-CEO with a lot of overlap in their Venn diagrams, both in terms of roles and responsibilities and in terms of how they would make decisions. It was all very joint. But as they specialized, it created a little bit of distance. And so there was this kind of subcategory of trying to figure out how close can we be? Can we still be close friends if I'm feeling frustrated with your work performance? Or is that threatened? And so it really became a debate about like how close do we want to be? How can we re-engineer our friendship and our co-founding relationship to work at this current scale? Because what was working before is no longer possible.
Does it help if they're friends? I guess it depends, but, like, a lot of friends start companies, and they think it'll be a good idea, and then the crucible starts, and the growth, if they do it right, starts, and the specialization happens and so forth. Is it better to be close friends or not
So
necessarily?
it's such a good question, and this is where Noam Wasserman's book, The Founder's Dilemmas, is really fascinating. He did a lot of
Uh-huh.
quantitative research. Part of what he found is that companies who are co-founded by friends are more unstable than those founded by strangers, so people who didn't know each other previously.
Uh,
And the reason is because when there's a dual relationship, or what I call a multiple relationship like that, where you're co-founders and something, whether that's we're married, we're exes, which I can talk to you about that, or
oh, yeah.
yeah, or friends. The challenge is that it feels like really challenging feedback to give threatens not only the professional but also the personal, and so it feels like a catch 22,
Right.
right? Like if I give you
Yeah.
really difficult feedback, then maybe all of a sudden, if we're living together, for example, you're going to give me the cold shoulder, or that's going to impact how I feel in this home environment. That's going to create these bad vibes, this walking on eggshells, and so I would rather not give you this feedback so that I can maintain peace in this other relationship. And so that's actually what can be so dangerous.
Yeah.
But with that said, I mean, the
Yeah,
flip
I've seen
side.
that in teams, in co-founders, the CEO doesn't wanna do something because 'cause they've got a friend and it's, festering procrastination. Everybody in a company could see it, kind of thing.
Exactly. And so, and that, to your point, that's whenever these problems can really have a multiplying effect that can be so negative, right? Is once the employees are seeing this, which by the way, they see it, they feel it, and then they have their own
Yeah,
sense,
yeah.
whether it's back channeling or raising other issues. It's like that's whenever some of these teams, like whenever you're not aligned as a co-founding unit, have such a detrimental effect on the company's performance.
Because the founders and co-founders set the ultimate, decision makers on strategy and values and culture and, the approach there, and, if there's a disturbance in that force, it multiplies across the companies. Is there any way to quantify, the company impact of that conflict that's not productive?
I think it's difficult to quantify right now, but there are actually some teams in Europe that I'm in contact with who are trying to create a little bit more research in this area, and so they've done a little bit on the space about co-founders, and now that they're looking at co-founders to teams, and then they're going to look at investors to co-founders, and we're going to try to show this whole chain of data to try to quantify that impact because it absolutely exists, and I see it all the time, and this is where again it becomes so important to get it right, because it's one thing to have an aspirational value and to throw that slogan around, or, to have those values printed. But if you're not
Yes.
modeling that behavior, it's doomed from the start.
If you're not both modeling the behavior, just like a family, I guess, right?
Exactly.
Oh, that's really interesting. Well, let's talk about families. I've had several people on the podcast, and I know several folks, at least one of my peer groups here, who started in their companies, and the co-founder, co-leader is their spouse. So, and they seem to be doing fine. I know my spouse says, I would never work for you, right? We have different personalities, different approaches. We had the same strategy with our family and values, but she wouldn't want to work with me on anything like that. But several figure it out how to be co-founders and spouses.
100%. I actually work with a very large number of teams like this,
I bet.
whether they are married.
Double stakes.
Yeah, 100%. And well, because the reason they come to see me is they might see a couples therapist, but usually what happens is the couples therapist can help them to some extent with the interpersonal dynamics, but because they're entrepreneurs, because they're founders, and this takes up 80+% of their identity
Yeah.
and mind share, the challenge they run into is that the therapist doesn't understand business. And
Yeah.
fundamentally, they don't want to sit there in sessions and educate them on what all this means and what this looks like. And from a psychological lens, like speaking as the psychologist hat, not the coach, what the problem is with psychology is that we lack cultural competence to work with entrepreneurs. We actually
The
don't understand
context
what
for
it's
the
like.
game that they're playing. Yeah.
Exactly. And so kind of removing that hat, like I have that context, which is exceptionally helpful, because then part of what makes, I think, a good good co-founder coaching engagement is that we not only want to improve those soft skills, those interpersonal dynamics, raise the self-awareness of self and other, and those types of things. What we also want to do is make sure that there's actual changes in business, whether that's process, whether that is
Yes.
changing roles and
What's the impact?
responsibilities, the equity
Hmm.
in the comp. Exactly. And if we don't address both, then the issue will recur.
I see.
And so to your point, part of what I see that works really well in teams like that is having a space to be able to tend to both of those fires. They're two different fires. You have to maintain some of the
Ah,
intimacy, connection outside of work, a lot of passive repair where you're spending time together doing those things you enjoy that's not related to work, I think could be helpful. And there needs to be ideally a lot of alignment and, again, explicit agreements in place about how to handle some of those workplace issues. Because I guess the thing, just to go on a brief tangent, part of what can be so fascinating here is both there's a spillover effect where the challenges at work can impact you at home, and a
mhm.
crossover effect where the home issues can make the work issues worse. And so that's why, again, if you're married and a co-founding team, it's so important to really manage both domains effectively.
And does that mean understanding that that's important to work on and we take time to work on it in kind of mature and generous ways with your tools and those kind of approaches that things you just can't let it happen and has to be nurtured or explicitly managed?
I would say that is my general recommendation for all co-founders, and especially ones like this with the dual relationship component. The relationship, you can't just allow it to take care of itself, because it won't work.
Mhm.
You mentioned being married, right? It's like if you all of a sudden like stop dating your spouse, you have no time together, you're just focused on raising the kids. What
Yeah.
happens? There's a lack of connection that starts to take place, and then we start telling ourselves stories about what's going on in the other person's head, and we feel frustrated with them, and then we're defensive, and then all of a sudden the conversations are dysfunctional. Like, this is the reality of any relationship. So we need to be intentional with how we design our systems to make sure that we can maintain connection and alignment.
Yeah. One of the things I think is interesting about entrepreneurs, founders, co-founders, all of us crazy people doing this is that we get really stubborn about creating something significant in the world that didn't exist. Meaning, we get stubborn. The world needs to see it our way, and we're going to go make it happen. We can get stubborn about the way we do it. So it's ironic that a lot of entrepreneurs say, "I can't believe my employees and the market and my customers don't want to change," and then they go through the journey and don't want to change themselves. So it's a little ironic there. Do you have to be open to change? And when two founders come together, do they both have to say, "We know there's an issue. We both are going to work on it"?
It takes two to tango. Right. And so if there's a situation where one person is absolutely unwilling to change, unwilling to evolve or to do any type of
Okay.
personal or professional development,
And
that does really create some fundamental issues that ultimately, just to fast forward a bit, again, if that person is never going to get on board, do create
yeah.
this kind of tension in yourself where you have to decide, am I willing to sacrifice some of my own well-being, my values, internalize that resentment and continue working, but in a thing that doesn't feel congruent with myself, or do I need to exit? Like, that is a real challenge that people end up facing.
And you can help them get clear about that. Either this is something that can be solved, or it can't be solved and we need to deal with it, right? Some kind of way. What percentage of let's say what's the co-founder divorce rate out there? Do you have any sense for that?
I'd be curious. I bet Noam Wasserman wrote about that, and I just don't remember the statistics.
Yeah.
But at least anecdotally in the work that I do, that like honestly, the vast majority of teams that I work with end up continuing to work together. But again, like this is where the time horizon, also my sample gets a little bit biased. So there's also a lot of shorter engagements that I do where we put the kind of a stress test on the relationship. We do like a month intensive where I'm meeting with you multiple times a week. And that's whenever we typically are doing a little bit more of a stabilizer split where we're assessing, is this something that we're both willing and committed to working on? Or have we already built up too much emotional debt that we're not willing to pay down? Are there conflicting values here fundamentally about the business or personally that actually we're not willing to work on? And this is the other thing that's fascinating to me. Every single team that I work with has a different threshold of pain and tolerance for what they're willing to put up with and what they're not. So I
I get
actually
it.
can't make a universal ruling like what works for you doesn't work for me and vice versa. And so that's part of what the work that I do is helping you as the co-founder get really clear about, is this in alignment or not?
Yeah. Gosh, that's really interesting. So you're talking that we talked about that co-founders make up the majority or just over half. It's more in VC funded, a little less so in bootstrapped software. Co-founders are probably the slight majority overall, and from what we see there. But in almost all cases, there is a CEO in charge, and the other co-founder plays some other important role. And the responsibilities may be divided in all kinds of ways. But is that a source of conflict that one is the CEO, quote, in charge, the ultimate decision maker, dealing with boards and VCs and the rest, and one is not, whether it's recognition or power or decision making. You know, does do you need a CEO, a single decision maker?
I mean, so I also work in like the crypto space where there's a bit more decentralized,
I
like
bet.
companies
I
as a
bet.
whole, which is
Uh-huh.
a little bit more flat, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't go as far as saying that it's absolutely necessary. I do think the context, the people, the personalities, the business, it all matters. But I think it can be helpful to be able to have a clear framework for how to resolve tensions and disagreements if there's no ability to resolve it. Like if we're at a crossroads where you're saying, "Hey Matt, that number in front of you is a 6." And I'm saying, no, from my perspective, it's a 9. And neither of us are willing to budge. We're both 5 out of 5 intensity and care about this thing. Then that's whenever that final decision maker, whether that's kind of a third party who has to come in and weigh, or the CEO, or the person with more equity. Like, I do think that there is a forcing function there that can be helpful. But again, what I care far more about is the process getting up until that point. So I think this is where,
Right.
like, for example, a lot of investors go wrong because they're like, oh, we just need one person to have the decision making power or whatever. And so where they go wrong here and over index a bit is actually, yes, that's important, but everything before that is also important. So that if ideally we get to that point, but I feel heard and understood on every level
Yeah.
about how I feel about this being a 6 or being a 9 or whatever the case may be, then I'm far more likely to be able to do the Bezos example of disagree and commit because I felt my
Yeah.
voice is heard and we've made a decision and now we're both committed to seeing that decision through and maybe we're going to revisit it in however long, right? And so that's a very healthy way of going about it. Whereas if we're skipping that part of feeling heard and understood and just saying, nope, I have final say, whatever, and you didn't consent to that, but I'm the CEO, that's whenever those issues of power and recognition become more problematic.
Well, the CEO in charge, the ultimate decision maker, can either do it by themselves or involve people in a helpful kind of way. How long do you normally work with founders to get over the crisis or help them grow through the continuing journey? What are the models that usually work with founders?
If it's a true crisis situation, I tend to work with teams for 1 to 3 months, and we're able
Mhm.
to resolve that pretty consistently. If it's not that acute crisis level where we're trying to figure out stabilizing or splitting, and it's more so on the we want to build and maintain or do like a little reset and rebuild, that's
Yeah.
typically a 6-month process, and we can see
Mhm.
a lot of, like, really, incredible results in that amount of time, and so that's, like, what I can, like, more or less, like, guarantee, "Hey, if we all show up, engage in this system the right way, we're going to see that result in 6 months or less." But I also work with teams for multiple years who value the work, who really enjoyed the sense of alignment that they get and having that third-party perspective who's known them for a couple years and, kind of can see around the corner, give some feedback, etcetera. And so it really depends on the team and some of their needs.
Well, and you have your programs at cofounderclarity.com. They're described and you have the pricing there, very practical pricing. I know you're dealing with startups as I am, so you're not charging a fortune whether they're funded or not. And it's still early stage. It's really valuable, but you have very practical pricing for the kind of programs that you have. Do both founders need to show up and be willing to play? If I guess you can't do it from one side if the other doesn't show up.
That's kind of what I was saying before, where it takes two to tango, but only one to stop the dance. Right? So, ideally,
There we
yes,
go.
if we're both bought in, it's gonna be far more effective. That said, there have been situations where I'll coach individually someone on how to manage some of the dynamics with their co-founder if their co-founder is absolutely not on board. So I can approach it using an individual, but still keeping the systemic perspective in mind, and so that can be a workflow. But most optimal is certainly getting buy-in from both parties.
Okay. Well, really fascinating stuff. Thanks for the work you do to help co-founders out there. Co-founder issues are literally one of the painful parts of growing a serious company, and it is one of the crises that shows up with founders I know and that I work with. Sometimes it's a competitor that comes in, or something else changes in the business. But co-founder conflict could be one of those existential crises that they have to manage, and it's always tricky when they get through it. So, and to get through it, not everybody gets through it, as you described. And the fact that you're out there helping startup co-founders, this unique challenge, this unique journey, is really useful for the community out there. How can people reach you, Matt?
Yeah, thank you. And you can reach me online in a few different ways. One is cofounderclarity.com, as you mentioned. You can also try to look up this book, The Co-Founder Effect, which is available on
Yeah,
Amazon.
it's a good book.
And you can always feel free to email me, Matt at cofounderclarity.com.
Okay. So, one final thing here for founders who are listening, they're in the early stages. Maybe they have a co founder on board, maybe they're looking for one. What can you say to somebody who has a vision to start a company about getting the right co founder and doing it in the right way? Can you make some generalizations about getting started? I know, it's an ongoing challenge, but how to get started in the right way?
There's a few things that come to mind. One is to really trust your gut and your intuition. So if things are feeling off
Your vibe.
early, yeah, if that
Yeah.
vibe is off, listen to it. Because there's something in you that might be picking up on something that might not emerge until much later. But if you're overlooking it and overriding it because you're excited about the project, or you feel like, oh, this person from a skill set perspective could help me, maybe I can tolerate this discomfort. I think if you're feeling that early, it's a very big red flag, and so that should be a rule out. Which is
Okay.
unfortunate because I know that means, okay, now I have to further delay product if I'm looking for a technical
I
person or
know.
whatever.
Yeah.
There are
Yeah. Yeah.
consequences, but building with the wrong person is going to have far greater consequences on your mental, emotional well-being, on the company itself, right? Its chances of success. And so it's better to take that hit early than later. So I'd actually move on that as quickly as possible. That's one.
Right.
Two, I think a work trial. So doing a smaller project together first, ideally over a few months, where you can iterate, give and receive feedback, see how they operate, see that communication style, and just test out those waters a little bit more can be really helpful. I think there's several different conversation starters, and you can get this from the book, you can get this from other places as well. some of those early conversations to try to uncover and talk about these differences can give you a little bit of a head start. And then the last thing I would say is from day one, I would urge all founders to implement co-founder syncs and dates. So I talk about this in the book. Co-founder syncs are those operational language pieces where you're updating on what happened throughout the day or the week, most pressing issues of the business, trying to align prioritization, et cetera. And co-founder dates are a little bit more of building the skill of meta communication, talking about how we are communicating as a team from day one. And so that's going to be focused on how are we doing, what can we do to improve? How, like, I have some feedback for you, like I would like to share it, are you receptive? And that's a recurring time and space. It can be once a month, once a quarter. Some co-founders like to do this while on walks or doing other things together. And that's going to be kind of the home container for some of these more challenging conversations. And if you can normalize that and get that on the books early, it's going to really improve your long-term success.
Do we call that the emotional bank account?
That's right. You're filling the emotional bank account from day one.
That's awesome. Great. Well, I really appreciate you sharing some tools, your perspectives, what you're seeing in the co-founder conflict arena. And certainly we're doing big things that create big challenges. And if we can do it together with a co-founder and a team, it always works out better if you can make it work.
I'm with you 100%.
Thanks for being on the Practical Founders podcast, Matt.
Thanks, Greg. Appreciate it.
Thanks for watching this week's interview on the Practical Founders podcast. Be sure to like this episode and subscribe to the Practical Founders YouTube channel to keep up with my weekly in-depth interviews with serious software founders who are building valuable software companies without big funding. You can check out my blog, all the podcast episodes, and information about my Practical Founders CEO peer groups at practicalfounders.com, or message me on LinkedIn if you'd like to connect. See you next week.